$145 billion annually in the US in 2012. That was a 40% increase since 2007, and this number is likely exceeding now $320 billion a year. So if the individual importance of this isn't important, from a societal standpoint, it's a tremendous drain on resources. And importantly, diabetes is not just a disease of the developed world. This is not just a disease of the United States and Western Europe. This is a global epidemic. It's currently estimated that 415 million people have diabetes globally, and this number is projected to rise to a staggering 642 million by the year 2040. And I will say that every year these estimates come out, the numbers simply go up. We're going to be looking at a vast wave of diabetes, and as the Vice Consul said, this is truly a global epidemic. So I just wanted to talk a little bit about diabetes in the Filipino community specifically, because I think this is not something that's fully recognized, but the Filipino community is especially sensitive to diabetes. So the evidence that Filipinos are at increased risk of developing diabetes actually goes back to the 1960s. It's been known since the mid-60s that Filipinos are among the highest risk groups for developing type 2 diabetes. And then a couple of studies that came out in the 1980s showed some difference depending on where people lived in the Philippines. So those folks that lived in rural areas had a rate of diabetes in 1984 of about 2.5%. If they lived in urban areas, it was about 6.8%. And if they lived in Manila, it was about 8.4%. The reason I bring this up is not only because you may be able to translate this to your family and friends back home, but it also underscores part of the factors that we think contribute to the development of diabetes. The lifestyle of those live in rural areas where there's a lot of physical activity, where you're constantly active, where you need to do things as part of your job that are physically active, prevents the disease. In contrast, the changes that occur in modern life that lead us to move to modern cities and have office jobs where we sit at our desks most of the time actually increases our risk of developing the disease. There are that the risk of the disease is tremendous across the population. So in one study that came out in 2009, it was estimated that your risk of developing diabetes over a 9-year period was about 16.3%. which is much higher than the rates in the Western world. And it is currently estimated by the International Diabetes Federation that the burden of diabetes in the Philippines is approximately 3.5 million cases. 3.5 million cases of people with diabetes, and this does not include those people with pre-diabetes who we know are at increased risk. Yeah, let's do that. This basically is a plot of diabetes rates in the Philippines over time. And what you see is diabetes rates in the Philippines in red, the Western Pacific region in the solid black, and the world as a whole in this dotted line. And so what you can see in terms of looking at diabetes risk across age groups, people in the Philippines actually have higher rates of diabetes than those people living in other Western Pacific nations, as well as the rest of the world, and they develop this difference early on. So the important point here is this, that people of Filipino descent and people in the Philippines develop diabetes at a younger age, and why that's relevant events increases with the duration of the disease. So those people who are diagnosed earlier are more likely to suffer the consequences later. Furthermore, our current guidelines suggest that we actually screen for diabetes at older ages, and this suggests to me that we may need to think about intervention and screening efforts earlier in the Filipino population. Furthermore, when we look at people who develop so Filipinos have a higher rate of diabetes at younger ages. The other thing that's important to recognize is that this is not just true in the Philippines itself, but Filipinos who move to the United States have a very high rate of diabetes as well. One study in Texas, around the Houston area, showed that 16.1% of Filipinos had diabetes, compared to a national rate of about 10%. And again, this study was from 2001. We'd expect that these numbers are actually significantly higher at present. Importantly, while Filipinos also develop diabetes at a younger age, they also develop diabetes at lower body weights. So much of what we think about when we screen for diabetes, we think about people who are obese and overweight. In these studies, we see high rates of diabetes in the Filipino community at weights that we would consider normal, so normal body mass index, suggesting an inherent genetic susceptibility to the disease. And then this study looking at a group of folks living in Hawaii and California showed that Filipinos are about 2.2 times more likely to develop diabetes than non-Hispanic whites. And on top of it, going back to what the data I showed you before, they develop diabetes earlier. So earlier, at time points in which we're not normally testing diabetes, that puts people at increased risk of developing the complications of blindness, amputations, kidney failure, and cardiovascular disease. So hopefully you think that this is important, because it certainly is. So this is the one slide I have that tries to explain how diabetes works, because I think it's important to recognize, because the Filipino population is a little bit unique. The problem is that stress on our bodies to constantly make insulin ultimately leads to those cells in the pancreas to fail. We start losing our ability to make insulin, and we start falling off of this curve. This is first noticed during periods of peak stress. So peak stress from a metabolic standpoint is after a meal, and people develop what's called impaired glucose tolerance, which is a form of prediabetes. This is important to recognize because oftentimes this is a reversible condition. If people see us in clinic, we can do stuff about this. Unfortunately, many people progress then. The failure of the ability to make insulin progresses, and people ultimately develop frank type 2 diabetes, in which blood sugar levels are actually high, not only after meals, but also while they're fasting. The important point in the Filipino community is that there's a characteristic of the development of diabetes in Asian Pacific Islanders that is characterized by a beta cell defect. People in the Filipino community are more likely to develop diabetes because they are more sensitive to beta cell stress, and as a consequence, they're more likely to fall off of this curve because they're unable to make as much insulin. So the threat of increasing weight and physical inactivity is especially acute in the Filipino population. The million-dollar question is, what causes this? And that's what we don't know. Second question of relevance is, if we know this about the Filipino community, are there drugs to treat diabetes in Filipinos that may be more efficacious, more effective than other agents? And I would argue that based on this knowledge, seeing a specialist in diabetes who's aware of these kind of things may be relevant, because we do have a different cocktail of drugs that may be slightly more effective in situations like this. And I'm happy, it's a little bit off the topic a bit, but I'm happy to discuss it afterwards. Okay. So there are a couple of things. First of all, I gotta say, so this is based on some studies published by a Filipino author that I think get to some of the challenges that we have as clinicians taking care of the Filipino population with diabetes. So first is sort of this issue of a belief system. In what's going to be is going to be, and I don't have any control over that. I think it's important for us to bust that because it's not true. So we can do things to prevent the development of diabetes if we know about it early and if we act early and aggressively. And this is critically important because we know from clinical trials that the earlier and more aggressive we are early in the course of the disease, the better the outcomes are later in life. So we want to get people early. Second is, certainly there are issues with language. And many of our clinics are English only, and we need to get Filipino-specific materials to the community in order to ensure that we're meeting people where they are and meeting their health literacy. We often, in medicine, take a very westernized approach of the individual, but in my reading about Filipino culture, this is a very cohesive culture in which social networks are important. So I think it's important that we take advantage of this when we try to actually treat the disease, and treat the disease more as a community and less as an individual, because I think that can help. Secondly, there are certain metabolic stressors that are inherent to the Filipino diet, including noodles and rice. I'll talk about rice in a second. We are going to have to think creatively about how to derive alternatives to this, and we will need help from you in order to do that. Finally, I think it's important to recognize that we are, as I showed you, Filipinos develop diabetes earlier. That means that we are often delayed in the diagnosis, and we need to identify these people earlier. In order to do that, we need to be out in the community, testing people. People need to be encouraging their families members to see physicians, and to come see us early so that we can actually do something about it. So those are some of the challenges. We have approaches that are actually meaningful. We know from good clinical prevent the development of diabetes in those people who are pre-diabetic. This includes things like reducing sugar and carbohydrate intake, those things that are going to stress those beta cells and their ability to make insulin. We need to diagnose early, and importantly, we need to treat early, and we need to treat with the appropriate agents in order to preserve normal blood sugar control. How we do this is not fully known. We have plenty of tools available to us, but we still have many questions that we need to address. Some of these questions include really trying to understand why we know that there is more dysfunction in those insulin-producing beta cells, but what drives that? What is the genetic source of that, and how importantly can we intervene in a directed way to improve diabetes control in those who have it? And then the other thing that I want to talk about just briefly, just because I spend most of my time thinking about this, is thinking about other risk factors that promote the development of diabetes. So this is the part where I say it is critically important for me to let you know that I believe firmly that genetics are important, that diet is important, and that physical inactivity is important. What my lab is interested in are other factors that add on to diet and physical activity and genetics to increase the risk of diabetes. So I like this quote from Rachel Carson. This is from Silent Spring. She wrote this book in 1962, and it basically kicked off to engulf our environment. A drastic change has come about in the nature of the most serious health problems. And this, I think, is as true today as it was 55 years ago when she initially wrote it. So the changes that we have made to the environment are drastic. So what I'm showing you here is this is housing development outside of Mexico City, in which these hills that would be normally covered in forest are actually wall-to-wall buildings and houses for people. On the upper right is a palm oil plantation in Indonesia. This would have formerly been rainforest that now has been completely transformed to agriculture. On the bottom left is the tar sands in Canada for energy extraction, where again, this has been completely despoiled with a tar pit here. And we all see this when we fly across the country, when you see the transformation of the environment for agriculture. These changes have had profound effects on what we're exposed to and how we live our life. I don't want to say that this isn't important. We need to feed a growing population. We need to have energy for this population, but we need to do so in a responsible way. This is data that we put together from the U.S. Tariff Association. So what you see here is rates on this in red. You can see that there's marked concordance with this. So this rise in synthetic chemical production has been associated with a similar rise in diabetes rates across the country. I'm not saying that these two things are necessarily directly related to each other, but there's a lot of evidence to suggest that they might be. There are other things that correlate with this too, including physical inactivity and changes with our diet, so they really all do fit together. One thing that my lab has been interested in now for a while is the effect of environmental pollutants on the development of diabetes. And one of the compounds that we've gotten quite interested in is arsenic. Arsenic is a compound that contaminates the drinking water of about 150 million people globally. And this was just a story that came out this last July. Concentrate arsenic. There have been some nice studies in the Philippines to show that rice from different regions of the Philippines are actually not high in arsenic, but in certain regions, arsenic levels are actually quite high. And this is thought to have been from the eruption of Mount Pinatubo. because volcanic ash actually is high in arsenic. And we've actually shown, and I'm not going to go into a lot of the detail here, that arsenic has the capacity to disrupt this relationship I told you about. We've been able to show, and others have been able to show, that a variety of environmental pollutants can affect both insulin sensitivity as well as insulin release. So another one of those factors, in addition to diet, exercise, and physical inactivity, that contribute to the development of diabetes. So this is where my lab is interesting. I feel like I need to mention it because this is the stuff that the ADA has funded, and it's something that I feel quite passionate about. So in closing, just want to talk a little bit about diabetes care at the University of Illinois. I mentioned this a little bit already. We have a robust program that focuses on clinical care. So we have an endocrinology and diabetes clinic in which we see patients. There's a large diabetes research portfolio. I do environmental contributions, but I have other folks who are interested in beta cells, these insulin-producing cells, interested in studies looking at the social drivers, what makes immigrant populations vulnerable, what makes vulnerable populations have increased risk of diabetes. We study those type of things. And then we're very much interested in developing community partnerships. And I think that this is the thing that I want to leave you with, is that we are very interested in getting into communities that have diabetes risk, because we feel that it's incumbent upon us to reduce that risk. The suffering from this disease is too much, and there are things we can do about it if we partner together. And so we're here for you, and look forward to continuing to collaborate. So with that, I'm going to close, but I'll be happy to take questions later. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sargis. Appreciate your words so much, and I hope that this next portion of the has. Let me just ask, do you mind if raising your hand if someone in your family has diabetes? Yeah, so that's more than half of you. Have someone in your family, in your own family, who's suffering from this. Diabetes affects everyone. The American Diabetes Association is the only organization that is pursuing treatments, preventions, and cures of all types of diabetes, and is fighting for the rights of all people with diabetes. The ADA funds, we don't like to duplicate services. The ADA funds research that is filling a critical unmet need. Dr. Sargis and I were talking just before this presentation, and we really feel that if down the road the American Diabetes Association funds research that helps Filipino Americans, that would be filling a critical unmet need. We do not feel that there has been enough research in this area. The American Diabetes Association has never funded any research to help people of Filipino descent. And we want to see that change. Arsenic is a problem in drinking water in America, and it's a problem in drinking water in the Philippines. So it stands to reason that his research can potentially impact you and your loved ones. Now, the ADA has funded research on the health disparities of Latino and Hispanic populations, and I thought talking about one of those research projects here might get our brains moving into what we might be able to do to help people of Filipino descent. So Latinos have worse blood sugar and more mental stressors, such as immigration and English as a second language, than non-Latino whites. 250 Latinos in this research study with type 2 diabetes had their body function measured. Half got diabetes education only, and half got diabetes education plus 9 group sessions of stress management. And if these hypotheses are correct, once the project is complete, the study will produce a new non-pharmacological treatment to improve body function and to prevent diabetes. As we see here, research project sponsorships begin at $50,000, and that would be a named project where somebody would study under any group or name that you care, any company that you care to fund it with, and it would be centered around Filipino Americans. And if you wanted to further designate it, that's something, it's very flexible. That's one thing that I've been very impressed by the American Diabetes Association is if people have a specific problem that they worry about, we truly can talk about it and find ways to alleviate that worry. The American Diabetes Association writes the standards of care that doctors and professionals use in the treatment of diabetes here make their way to an endocrinologist, especially not for their everyday care. They're being diagnosed by their primary physicians there in their primary office. And especially in the Philippines, but here as well, doctors who see Filipino patients might not have the training that they need, the up-to-date training that they need in order to approach diabetes and help their patients in ways that are up-to-date and current. I included in the packets a analysis of diabetes in the Philippines by the World Health Organization. Yeah, it's that one, the blue one. And if you look at the bottom, one thing that I was really concerned about in the Philippines is people in the Philippines don't have access to basic diabetes care techniques, even such as insulin. And I find that very concerning, and there's an international education program. It is just being wrapped up in Vietnam and also Indonesia. It's a 5-year program where the American Diabetes Association works with the local diabetes federation and with professionals over in this country it's a train-the-trainer type program where we train endocrinologists, and the endocrinologists then go out and train and study the patients of the primary care physicians. And I think at the end of 5 years, if the WHO, the World Health Organization, came in to look at how the Philippines were taking care of diabetes, it would be much better at the end of that 5-year study. This international education program is not inexpensive, so it's something that I'm hoping for, like a 10-year plan in working with this group. Of course, if you know anybody who might be interested in helping fund or invest in this type of program that truly would help people of Filipino descent the world over, the program runs between $600,000 and $800,000. But it's something that would make a huge difference and reverberate for generations. Asians have a lower, so I'm Caucasian, my doctor will test my blood sugar if my body mass index is above a certain amount. And Jean, your doctor would test it at a lower body mass index, so you don't have to be as heavy as I do in order to be tested for diabetes. The health community knows this. And I was just on a call today, and now the advocacy team is working in Congress to try to make that law, to say that Asians will be tested for diabetes at a body mass index of 23, where that will then help to prevent diabetes among Asian Americans. And that's our advocacy team that's doing that. Through advocacy at the American Diabetes Association, people have the chance to raise a powerful national and local voice for people with diabetes. I would love for somebody from the Filipino American community, a cohort, to be able to go. This is a picture of our call to Congress, which this year is going to be on March 29th through 31st. The American Diabetes Association partially sponsors people to go attend this call to Congress, and then it's partially self-funded as well. But our advocates get the chance to have their voices heard in the U.S. Congress, and this would be a wonderful chance to go and tell about the importance of funding this type of research and to stand up for recent immigrants and to remember people of Filipino descent when it comes to funding diabetes research. there is a person in California, my major gift officer counterpart in California was just telling me a story. He was working with a couple who believed strongly in the power of advocacy, and they wanted their voice in Southern California to be heard regarding diabetes. So they funded a gift. They funded a $50,000 gift that says that every year for the next 5 years, up to 5 advocates from their area will attend this call to Congress. See, this call to Congress occurs when Congress is in session. And then when they leave and they go back to their districts, the advocates that go to call to Congress then go to the state capitol and meet with them there, and go to their offices in their own districts and meet with them there. So it's an ongoing program that really does make a big difference. Now imagine this gift that was funded with $50,000 for the next 5 years. There's going to be some really solid advocates in Southern California, and that's going to make a big difference in diabetes funding in that area. Total wellness improves the quality of life for people with diabetes. The unique nature of diabetes demands patient participation that help them lead healthier lives. So community-based outreach. Every year, the American Diabetes Association sponsors a Health and Wellness Expo. More than 10,000 community members come to it, and it's a resource. It's a resource fair where people can come and learn all that they need to know about preventing and curing diabetes, and everybody from the Chicago area who has a stake in the game is really there. If this group wanted, the opportunities at Expo begin at $2,500 for a booth. There's a really neat opportunity. There's going to be a Unity and Community area at Expo this year. It's held down at McCormick Place. It's giant. A Unity in the Community is going to be a cultural area, and we're currently looking for a sponsor of the Unity and Community area for $10,000. Then they could do a special speech at the expo. They could do, but more than anything, I've included this information about Expo in there because it's a free event, a free family event, and we'd love for you to come out. Step Out, Walk to Stop Diabetes is a celebration of all that people with diabetes accomplish. There are 2 community walks in this area. We'd love for you to come out and have a team in September of 2017. A diabetes prevention program is a 16-week curriculum that helps people who have been diagnosed with prediabetes. There is a specialized life coach who meets once a week with the folks for 2 hours. Usually the class size is about 20 people, and it's free to the people who take the class, and then after 16 weeks of once-a-week classes, there are 9 weeks of follow-up with an individual coach. And by the end, hopefully you will have lost 8% of your weight, and your A1C, which is a good indicator of your general health and blood sugar, is lower. So we could absolutely, if this group was interested and if there was enough support within the community from it, we could do a specialized Filipino-American diabetes prevention program in any location that worked for you, in any language that worked for you. There's high startup costs, but after that, it can be repeated as many times for very low. And that project runs about $85,000. Camp Power Up is a camp for kids. We're piloting it this year in the Chicago area for African Americans on the south and west sides, but children who have been diagnosed with pre-diabetes will come and learn with their families. It's a 5-day camp where they come and learn with their families about nutrition and wellness and exercise, and then hopefully go on to lead happy, healthy lives once they learn a few of these simple, not so simple techniques. And if there was interest and a high rate of obesity among Filipino Americans in this community, among the youth. We could do a Filipino American Camp Power Up. I gave you a couple brochures. I think the brochure, it says, do you have pre-diabetes? And if you look on the back, it says it in Spanish. We could do that in Tagalog. There's many, many, many things. Think of what you need, and we'll see if we can work together. That's what we want to do, because this is really what it's about. Together, I know we can stop diabetes and improve the lives of people of Filipino descent. I know we can, and I grew up with it, and he was the last of all 7 of his siblings to pass away from diabetes complications. My mom had it. My brother and I both weighed nearly 10 pounds when we were born because she had gestational diabetes. And now she is an insulin-dependent diabetic as well. My grandma is currently blind in one eye, losing vision in the other from diabetic retinopathy. So it's a very personal situation for me, but it's also something that if we here in this room, I'm so excited, because if we here in this room could have this kind of far-reaching impact, that this would make it all worth it. Turned out a lot smaller than I hoped, but so the board has just approved the American Diabetes getting to an endocrinologist in many of the areas of the Philippines. That said, I guess I want to hear from you. What your concerns are with diabetes, what your stories are, what you think might help.
The question is for the doctor. It seems that Filipinos have been identified as a race with more than normal susceptibility to diabetes. And I was wondering, maybe the word is not this, but I was wondering what would happen to the children of mixed marriages. Will the racial component reduce the onset of diabetes if a Filipino or Filipino is married to another racial?
Yeah, so if everybody didn't hear that, the question is mixed marriages and the impact on diabetes risk in children. And I don't think the answer to that is known. I think it would depend on where those genes are coming. I think our understanding of that would be helped by understanding what the genetics of the Filipino population is that increases the risk of diabetes. I think it would seem like that risk would be reduced, but there have been no studies to date to actually look at that specifically. Good question.
I just want to say thank you very much for educating us this evening about diabetes. I'm born and raised here in Chicago, and my parents are from the Philippines, so my mother has diabetes. And one thing that I learned about Filipinos, don't take it personal or anything, but we're very hard-headed. So say nothing's wrong, something's wrong. My mom doesn't want to go to the hospital, nothing like that. So I think it's very important to educate the Filipino community because she's losing her eyesight, just like your grandma. So taking Januvia and all those other medications is extremely expensive, and it's not, feasible in some, they don't have it in the Philippines or here, it's like really expensive. So with that saying, for opening up my eyes, I would love to be a part of to educate, not just here, but I go to the Philippines every year to visit them. So thank you. Please, thank you very much. Comment card? Sure. Yeah.
I have a couple comments about that. One is
sorry, that was a mouthful, but
no,
I'm so excited.
Thank you for sharing. I think it's important to recognize that if your family members have diabetes, you're at higher risk of developing diabetes. Mm-hmm. You see it run in families. It's going to be people, your brothers and sisters are at risk if you develop it. Your kids are at risk if you develop it. So that should be motivation. Maybe even if you can't muster the motivation to take care of yourself, you have to recognize that this is a teachable moment. This is an opportunity to change generations. The other thing I would say is that Jenna mentioned gestational diabetes, so this is developing diabetes during pregnancy that often will go away, but the important point there is that gestational diabetes predicts the development of diabetes later. So if you develop diabetes or one of your loved ones develop diabetes during pregnancy, that is a huge warning sign, but it is also a blessing in the sense that that gives us the warning so that we can actually do things to prevent the development of diabetes later. The fourth point is related to medications. Medications suck. It's so expensive. The cost of diabetes medications has doubled in the last 5 years. We have these great medications that don't always work, but can prevent the complications of kidney failure and blindness if we can get them to people, but they're often very, very expensive. And we run into this in our clinic all the time, and it's just one of the things that I find just most heartbreaking. So we need, part of that advocacy has got to be getting insurance companies to cover these drugs that we know help, because we've had a bunch of studies recently to come out to show that certain agents can actually prevent heart attacks and strokes in people with diabetes, and we need to be able to get these medications into people. So what you said was spot on, and thank you for that.
Thank you so much. I'm a clinical dietitian doctor.
Oh, sweet.
So we're talking about general practitioners, patients that go in or that have been referred to an endocrinologist. It is interesting in my practice. It's interesting to see how people who have been diagnosed with diabetes for 20, 25 years and have not seen a dietitian.
Oh, yeah.
It's very common.
So they haven't seen, they do not know about carb counting. I see a few of my Filipino patients who say, I stopped eating white rice. Well, what about the other sources of carbs?
Right.
What about brown rice? I just eat brown rice.
Yep.
How much?
Yep.
It's the same carbs. So
It seems that in what I see, somebody who's diagnosed with diabetes, when they're 60, 70 years old, they've been preparing food their entire lives. To change it is mystifying to them. Additionally, I saw it, I grew up with it, with my grandpa, how my grandma would try not to feed him bread, but not necessarily understanding and then she'd try not to feed him fruit, and then but then they'd go and eat this salt pork, which is, it's, and from what I understand, there's no problem with fruit, but there's such mixed messaging out there in the media, from the government, there is a lot of mixed messaging, so it's really hard to tell what to do. I was at a resource fair at Millennium Park for people being bused in from Garfield Park. And so these folks, it's a health resource fair. There was the Heart Association table, the Diabetes Association table. Walgreens was there distributing flu shots. And people would walk up to the diabetes table and they would say, well, is neuropathy curable? And I would say, and they would be missing a limb. I mean, really, really bad diabetes. And I would say, well, I'm no doctor, but it seems that you control your blood sugar. And they would stop me right there and say, I don't know the first thing about that. And so it's a much bigger problem than just the individual. And there is a lot of guilt and shame associated with diabetes that doesn't need to be there because it's not your fault.
Yeah, I think the thing that always resonates in my head is that, related to both of the comments, is it takes a village. There aren't enough endocrinologists in the world to take care of 640 million people who are going to have diabetes. We need dietitians, we need primary care doctors, and we need family members to get educated about it. It takes a village. I mean, it is very hard as an individual to live with diabetes when you got other people living in the house who are eating dessert and having sugar and not doing anything. And it's very disempowering because then you see these people and you're like, well, how come they don't have it also? So I think it's important for us really to coalesce as a community to take care of these people. It takes a village, it takes a network of people who are willing to learn about it and support you. And that's the kind of stuff that we need to do this. It's not a doctor-patient thing alone. It's got to be the whole community to get that knowledge level up.
I don't really refer your patients to a dietitian.
What'd you say? Always. We're looking for a dietitian too. If you know anybody, we're looking to hire a clinical dietitian.
Yeah. it seems that we need this jolt to wake us up from our stupor. And but from your point of view, because I feel that you are in the avant-garde end of research, what are promising news about diabetes? Because I saw on TV once that there's a certain line of cancer and some experiments showing that there's a medicine that can reduce cancer by 75%. I didn't catch what kind of cancer it was. But there are, obviously in cancer, there are advances now
Sure.
that are really very, very promising.
Sure.
Is there some good news for us here?
There's a lot.
on
There's a lot
diabetes?
of good news.
This is a very
Yeah.
gloomy report that we have. You know?
No, I realize it. So let me give you the good news. The good news is we know that the things that we know work. So the diabetes prevention program was a study that was done many years ago. And we know that if we get people to lose 7% of their body weight, if we get people to exercise for 150 minutes a week, if we get people to decrease the amount of sugar in their diet, they were less likely to develop diabetes. We know if we do it, it works. That's number one. Number two is there are two major studies that have come out in the last 12 to 18 months that have shown marked improvements. So for a long time, we have known that if we control diabetes with medication, people will develop less eye disease, less kidney disease, and need less amputations. What has been not clear is that if we are aggressive, do we prevent heart attacks and strokes and prevent people from dying? Those two studies came out in the last 18 months, one with Victoza, which you'll see commercials for, it's called liraglutide is the generic name, and the other one is empagliflozin or Jardiance, that have both showed reductions in death. That is a huge advance and moves us far forward. We know that people with diabetes don't just get cardiovascular disease, they do develop cancer also. And one of the things that's interesting is there's a diabetes medication that is the frontline therapy, metformin, that we try to give to everybody. Metformin looks like it reduces breast cancer risk as well. The last thing I would say is that for those people, so we try to intervene with these types of diseases while people still make some insulin, but sometimes if the disease continues to burn and smolder on, people will need insulin by shots, right? So we know people need to do these injections. There have been amazing advances in technology in which we can give insulin by a pump, and that technology has gotten better to a point where now that pump is starting to communicate with a sensor, and we're getting to a point where people are going to need to intervene less, and the machine is going to be able to do some of it for them. That has tremendous effects. I have one friend with type 1 diabetes who developed a device. It turned off the insulin pump when the blood sugar was going low. As a result, she was able to sleep through the night. But importantly, her 5-year-old was able to sleep through the night, which let her sleep better because she wasn't stressed about her kid getting low blood sugar and having something terrible happen like a seizure. So there are a lot of great things that are happening. And we're going to see more drugs coming up. One of the things I do is I serve on the CVS. I do some consulting work for CVS Health. We're constantly reviewing new medications, and new things are coming out for diabetes. This is not a time to lose hope. We have more power and tools and knowledge now than ever. The challenge is implementing. The challenge is getting out there and actually doing things about it. Thank you for that.
Thank you very much, Dr. Rob and Jenna. So we ended that discussion on a positive note. So at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we will have a short video presentation on autism. As I mentioned earlier, all over the Philippines.
Something
neurological condition affecting millions of Filipinos. We all have likely met or have seen an individual with autism in church, school, work, the mall, the movies, or the hospital. They're not any different from us. Except individuals with autism have a unique way of processing things they see, hear, feel, taste, and smell. Doctors consider it a developmental disorder. Governments legally recognize it as a disability. Families who live with autism have daily struggles not everyone can understand. On this occasion of the National Autism Consciousness Week, January 16 to 20, we celebrate the great things that the government has done for individuals with autism and their families, such as the Magna Carta of Persons with Disabilities, the Equal Opportunity Employment Act, the Anti-Bullying Act, and for some local government units, the unique services for children with exceptionalities. Partnership between the government, the private sector, and civil society groups like the Autism Society Philippines will ensure sustained inclusive development for the future. We hope this activity will serve as an inspiration, or at the very least, a reminder that some of our countrymen have invisible disabilities and need our understanding and support, especially when discharging our duties. So we end this session with a request and an invitation for all of us. So if we can do our share and pledge to promote acceptance of raise our right hand. Isang pangako. Ako ay nangangakong ikilos para mabuto at maging paggamit ng salitang autistic bilang kutya o katatawanan. Isusulong ko ang tunay na pagtanggap at pagkalinga sa mga taong may kapansanan sa tulong ng may kapal. Thank you very much. Salamat po. You may please.
In yesterday's tribune, in the op-eds, although we are aware about being sensitive about people with autism, I think that's what is all about. But then again, on the other side of the thing, I think for information, because this is a very interesting written by a doctor in the op-eds of the opinion pages of Tribune. They talk about vaccine on children, on infants, wherein like prominent personalities like Robert Kennedy Jr. won't have their children vaccinated because of the fear for autism. But that article was meant to debunk that, because the risk of not being vaccinated children will be susceptible to so many diseases, So I just thought that you might want to Google it, go back to it and see, or you evaluate it in your own way, That's the other side of this issue about autism. And with regards to the presentation, the music and all that, that's a very effective way of reaching out in relation to our discussion with diabetes, because it's good to have preventive kind of presentation like so, instead of talking about expensive medicine later, it's better to be aware. And we need it. I think we have good outlet, like we pay for our TFCs, the GMAs, for those cable. And if we can reach out them and produce something equivalent to diabetes, because it's really very difficult. Most of the churches here that are predominantly Filipino, it's almost like a part of our Sunday worship to have luncheon. And most of the lunches, I know very well there's so much to be decided about. If you check on what's it, especially, it's already rich with rice and fatty recipes being offered, and then again there's the sweet table. And we have a variety of those, and they are all probably not very good for diabetes, especially calamine, you know, those sweet ones and all that. You have sago, which is practically sugar drink, you know.
Something to
Very
die
high
for.
on sugar.
And to die of.
Yeah, and one thing about it is that I actually stopped going to a church that I like very much because they expect you to stay for lunch and eat with them. And they're so generous with food, but then I know it's not good diet, you know. And if you don't eat, you're not being polite because you're not appreciating what's being offered. So my suggestion is to go to another church. Because the church only offer like cut vegetable and coffee. You know, that yeah, but we have a saying, you know, us Filipinos, you know, we are known for our hospitality, and we take pride on bringing a lot of food. In fact, we lost some members in Couples for Christ, for instance, because wives who are more kind of sensitive, we have to stop attending Couples for Christ event because we bring so much unhealthy food, she says, you know. And which is probably wise, you know, unless you want to go to heaven very fast. Yeah, but the thing is that probably we should really, in fact, if you go to a Filipino store, we never change those, for instance, those coconut, those makapuno, they are swimming in white sugar syrup, you know. And the buyers of those are the young. In the 70s, when we were young, we liked to bring them because we got too used to eating them. But if you go now, we are still the #1 buyer because we are used to eating those. They haven't changed, while the Thailand counterpart have changed a lot, much healthier preparation. So probably we can also remind our importers of Filipino food from the Philippines. You know, they should be aware about that. You know, you could see this. You know what it is? It's makapuno. They are swimming in white sugar, you know, syrup, and you have to pay premium price for that because of its preparation. So I just thought that prevention is still the best way, you know, instead of worrying about the high cost of medicine and all that later. You know.
Thank you so much for PSA.
Who could come up with low-carb meals that would offer good alternatives. Like this is something that we always struggle with. We're trying to give ethnically sensitive diet information, but it would be great to incorporate Filipino chefs in this, to get them thinking creatively about how to make these alternatives in healthier ways.
Yeah, we have adobo fest where we have contests. Now, we come up with kind of a contest like that.
Yeah.
Maybe the best tasting Filipino food, but very healthy preparation.
Yeah.
Dr. Sargis, can I also add to that? It is important that we all learn how to read food labels
Oh, great.
and substitute them for carbs.
Yeah.
It's one of my have-tos in my clinical practice.
I support that 1,000%.
Thank you very much, Doctor and Madulio. Okay, and of course, Mr. Santos. By the way, he's a publisher, so all these things will come out in the So at this point, we'd like to invite our colleague, dear friend, Mr. Consul Melchor Laluña, to give us.
Okay, before we close this structured portion of this meeting, we take this opportunity for a moment to thank you, Dr. Sargis, Archuleta, for sharing your knowledge and insights about diabetes. Given the Filipinos' love for food and that for us no occasion is complete without food, we strongly suspect that this will not only be the first time that you'll be appearing here. And we trust that you're going to accept our next invitations. And part of it is one of the notable things that I learned tonight is that we have to change not only our consciousness and our diet, but we have to change our behavior. And we have to move away from our notional approach to things. Those things that we've already accepted that we have to throw away, we have to be very conscious, and we have to relearn a lot of things. Otherwise, we might die happy, but early. To the conscious kababayans, Filipinos here, Philams here, thank you for accepting our invitation. We hope that you will share, all of us will share, what we learned tonight to all of our other kababayans, our friends, our next of kings, to people who are very much dear to us, who were unable to come here tonight. And my first reminder is, please turn in those cards that they're asking outside for a discussion. Now, some announcements or updates. We enjoined all those qualified to vote to register as overseas voters. It's still ongoing. As voters, we can bring this advocacy about diabetes to the attention and to the consciousness. We can bring it to the consciousness of our next leaders and our departments in the Philippines. That's the Department of Tourism, Department of Agriculture, this labeling, and Department of Trade and Industry. We could bring this advocacy not only to these departments as voters, but we can cajole our national leaders who are, I think, suffering from time to time diabetes of the ears and listening to their own constituents. And we can be an effective agent when it comes to this. So it's not only a challenge, it's our obligation if we want to make a sweeping and expansive change in the Philippines. Be part of the voters' population. Register now. Second is that the consulate will be conducting a lot of consular extension outreach program. The first will happen on the 20th of January at Shreveport in Louisiana. There will be others too, in Missouri and in Mississippi. In addition to that, we are now about to observe the preparation for the observance of the anniversary of the Philippine independence. 100. Get your calculators, it's 1898. Diabetes of the brains. 119. Yes, 119. And 190. And join all of those things that's happening there. Not all of these activities, of course, are being done or will be initiated by the consulate. We have a robust from Filipino community. There are those who will be presenting. We have a food festival featuring the adobo again. The ubiquitous, deadly adobo. But it's delicious. Try it, doctor. And there will be the Filipino and the Filipino-US month, cultural month, that will be in October. And as I stated before, no occasion is complete without food. But we find an opportunity there to advocate good practices and to push for all of the insights that we learned tonight so that we can change people's behavior. We can also, or will also, we are encouraging everybody to regularly check our website. It's at chicagopcg.com, and our Facebook, the Consulate General of the Philippines in Chicago, to keep abreast of the gossips. Keep abreast of the activities, the events that will be happening. No matter how small, we will be also be putting there the activities of some members of the Filipino communities, organizations, tidbits, some restaurants or center that practices good diet and there's good ingredients and some trivia at best. So please follow us through, not through Twitter, but through our Facebook and our website. Again, thank you very much for
Videography, video editing, and reporting. This is Joseph Gelariosa of the journal Global Links and PM or PelAmMessenger.com in Chicago, Illinois.